morning. It is Friday, January 8th, 2016. This is your morning edition on I-24 News. Coming up later today, humanitarian crisis erupts in Syria as severe winter and wearing militaries bring thousands to hunger and near starvation. Iran accuses Saudi Arabia in the bombing of its Yemen embassy, and tensions between the two Mideast powers is boiling. Time Out Tel Aviv is getting some viral global exposure with its Arabs and Jews kissing. We're going to take a closer look. Good morning, I'm Yael Lavie, and we begin in Syria, where humanitarian crisis is unfolding in a rapid, frightening pace, as winter weather and hostile forces are driving thousands of people to the brink of starvation. The residents of the towns of Madaya and Zabadani, located near the Lebanese border, were hoping that a recent UN-brokered ceasefire might be the harbinger of better times. But in the rebel-held, predominantly Shia villages, some people have resorted to eating grass. Meanwhile, a report by the Associated Press has revealed a timeline prepared for the White House, which shows that administration's best-case scenario for political transition in Syria does not foresee President Bashar al-Assad stepping down before March 2017. Though described as unofficial and very preliminary, the document does provide some insight on what the United States thinks needs to happen in order to bring stability back to the country that has been plagued by civil war for 5 long years. Let's take a look at the following report about the latest from Syria, the humanitarian crisis as well. Break it down from there.
It was meant to be a truce. Wounded Sunni rebel fighters gathered their families and left the northern Syrian towns of Zabdani, Kefraya and Fua after they fell to regime forces following 2 years of heavy fighting. In exchange, Hezbollah Shia fighters were guaranteed safe passage out of the remaining rebel-dominated towns close to the Lebanese border. Residents left behind were promised help, but they say pro-regime forces are still blocking supplies.
This protest is a reaction to the suffering of our people in Zabadani and Madaya and all the towns that have been part of deals with the regime. The regime has led these towns into truces but has breached these deals even with the presence of organizations like the UN.
According to monitors, hundreds of children are suffering from severe malnutrition and starving to death. The winter weather and heavy snowfall is only exasperating the situation. In Latakia, thousands who fled their country's civil war are huddling for warmth.
It's cold and there's snow. We barely managed to get a tent. We don't have anything at all. We have an old person. It's too cold. We're unable to get wood or relief.
The picture is much the same across the northern border, where Abu Hamada and his family, having fled to Lebanon from Aleppo, now struggle to keep the tent warm. His daughter Nawal says what matters most is that her children are safe and away from the war raging in Syria.
What's important for me is to keep my children away from death. We can handle the cold. It's easier than death, barrel bombs and shelling.
Peace talks are scheduled in Geneva at the end of the month. But even US President Barack Obama doesn't see his Syrian counterpart leaving office before he does, leaving little hope for those waiting for help that it will arrive anytime soon.
Joined in studio this morning by Russia Today Mideast Bureau Chief Paula Sleer. Good morning to you. With us also Elizabeth Surkov, a research fellow at the Forum for Regional Thinking. Good morning. And of course, I-24 News senior Middle East analyst Ali Walker. Good morning to you. Elizabeth, I'd like to start with you. What do we know about the situation, the humanitarian situation right now in those towns in Madaya?
So Madaya and Zabadani are towns inhabited by Sunni Muslims, and they have been under siege by the Assad regime and Hezbollah, who've planted mines around the two towns and are preventing people by snipers from leaving and from gathering even firewood. And the result is that, according to Doctors Without Borders, who are operating a field hospital in Madaya, 23 people have died due to starvation in Madaya thus far. And there are images coming from that town showing, children in a very, very bad condition. Most of the people who've died are old because they prefer to give food to the children. But children have also died. Situation there is very dire. People are eating leaves. They are slaughtering cats to eat them. They are trying to do whatever they can to survive. And recently they've started a campaign calling on all activists around the world and in Syria to rally and show the images coming from their town. And it seems that right now the Assad regime has agreed to let food in. It still hasn't happened, but there was a lot of international pressure on the Assad regime and Hezbollah to allow food inside, and I hope that it will alleviate the suffering there, because people there are fainting. They're walking around and fainting, and this is all amid snow, and they have trouble keeping warm because collecting firewood leads to death.
Yes.
The situation is horrible.
As we can see from the images and the reports, and Ali Wakil with us in studio, I want to ask you, the ceasefire that was supposed to be brokered, why did it fall apart this time around?
I think, Yael, first we should mention that we are talking all the time about Iran, Saudi Arabia, Assad, and the rebels. At the end of the day, the story is these people
caught in the middle of that fight.
Absolutely, and we see that in this war, both sides, we should say, do not rent any measure to be taken in order to gain more and more points on the ground. And I think that what other places did not make to the image of Hezbollah, if you follow the social media, even those who are supporting Hezbollah and who are supporting the regime, at the least we can say that they are, the Hezbollah is very embarrassed from the campaign that is led against him, that say that due to sectarian background he is contributing to a siege against a Sunnite population that is starving to death, showing elders slaughtering cats and dogs and preparing the food for their kids is not images that Hezbollah and the regime wanted to see. And this is why I think at the end of the day, in the coming days, we were talking even about this weekend that the regime will allow food to go inside Madaya. But for the moment, the regime has no interest to honor, to respect ceasefires. He believes that the momentum is on his side. And it is true, we are almost not hearing about any progress of the Islamic State. And on the contrary, we are hearing that the regime is succeeding in Sheikh Maskin, the very strategic town between
fighting the regime of Assad, fighting ISIS on the ground in Syria.
Absolutely, and he thinks that the moment is not for any ceasefire. The maximum we can do is local reconciliations, like we saw in Homs and elsewhere, and to keep the pressure over the rebels, because everybody is waiting to see what would be the initiative of the end of January, in order the equation and the formula that will be launching a negotiation process between the regime and the opposition.
Between the regime and opposition. Paula Slier, I don't know if you had a chance, I'm assuming you had the chance to see the AP report where the United States supposedly has this document, a preliminary document they're saying right now, of Bashar al-Assad in power until 2017, but with the agenda of getting him out. First of all, in your mind, because we're looking at these pictures, and I think Ali mentioned the thing that we all have to remember. When all these powers are fighting, at the end of the day, it's the people who are starving and dying and are being bombed on the ground, the civilians. Bashar al-Assad, 2017, you've covered this region extensively. Do you think he's going to leave by 2017?
You always ask me these difficult questions.
Do you think that, I mean, do we think that Syria without Bashar al-Assad, okay,
is sustainable?
Yeah.
Well, it depends who you ask again. You know, what this paper reveals, on one hand, it's nothing new, because you've had the Russians and the Americans talking about this for some time. It talks about Bashar al-Assad stepping down in March 2017, but it also, the arrangement is that there'll be elections in March. So if the elections reveal that the people want him to stay, then the argument is going to be that he needs to stay. If the elections reveal that he needs to leave, then the talk on the ground is that he will oversee a process to a transitional government, and at that stage he'll step down. The Russians would want him to step down if that was the voice of the people. The Russians are not tied to Assad necessarily staying in power. To be fair to the Russians, they're more tied to their own interests in Syria, and whoever will look after that interest better. And of course, at the moment, Assad is the person to do that. What is also interesting about this paper is that the time frame of March 2017 essentially means that Assad will outlive Obama's political career. It also points to the fact that the Americans, from months ago saying Assad must step down are now saying, saying Assad can stay in power until. So it's certainly a different kind of rhetoric that's coming out of Washington and European powers.
No, very true. That, it's no longer, this is the red line, but the red line has now moved into a dotted little line.
It's not an unimaginable scenario to see Assad presented in the elections and winning the elections if the split within the division within the opposition will remain as it is right now. We have an opposition based in Turkey, we have an opposition based in Syria. The Russians are now adopting and developing an opposition that will be loyal to their interests. And of course, there is the civil opposition inside Syria. By the way, there is a minister, and the portfolio is the Minister of Reconciliation, and he is an opposition leader who is now a member of the current government of Bashar Assad. So for the moment, I don't see from the people we know, from the personalities, who can defeat Assad if the opposition will remain in its current situation.
In the current situation, Elizabeth Circa, finally to you, because you research and you listen to these people. At the end of the day, the agenda of world powers is clear when it comes to Syria. Is there any way to gauge what, at this point, other than just to live and survive and eat, who do the people of Syria want in power?
So, of course, it's quite challenging to estimate that. There were polls done by researchers on the ground. They generally tend to show what kind of makes sense. The majority opposes Assad simply because they're not part of his sect, and he has mistreated all other sects terribly, barrel bombing, chemical weapons, starvation. So there were several polls done that way. But of course, it's very, very challenging to see what people think during wartime, when people are also afraid of speaking the truth. For example, the same polls show that in areas controlled by ISIS, there is support for ISIS. But at the same time, huge numbers are leaving. So clearly, people are terrified of saying the truth, of expressing how they honestly feel. But of course, when a regime, brutally massacres people from a certain sect for a very long time, and that sect is the majority, it is natural that the majority would oppose Assad, but of course, a big chunk of them are no longer living in Syria. And this is why the Assad regime was quite furious with the desire of the international community to include refugees outside of Syria in the election process. Because, of course, 80% of the people who left are Sunni, are people who oppose the regime very clearly, and would, of course, vote for any opposition against them.
But as we said, all the things are in a bigger play, in a bigger chessboard that is the Middle East. And sadly, we have to remember the people. You made some very, very, very good points in that respect. But within the region, it's the bigger powers that make the people starve or pay the price.